So Atari tried to sue Activision for making unlicensed games. They later settled in court, and supposedly the settlement between Activision and Atari led to Atari licensing third parties to make games for the Atari 2600. And plenty of people did take up that license. But until then, several companies saw Activision doing this, and they're like, oh, I can do that? And they jumped on...
Wait a minute!
Right? They were like, we can make video games? That's where all the money is now. So they jumped on it. And you had video game companies make unlicensed games. Absolute and Epix and iMagic and Konami and Sega all made unlicensed Atari games here in the U.S. You had tabletop companies like Milton Bradley and Parker Brothers and Avalon Hill all making unlicensed Atari games. Then you had TV and film companies like 20th Century Fox and CBS making unlicensed Atari games. It was the
this
fucking
couldn't
Wild
cause
West.
any problems.
No, certainly not.
I'm sure this is all fine.
And then you also have Atari's competitors, Coleco and Mattel and Amiga, making unlicensed Atari games.
Yeah.
And
Tell
eventually,
me more.
Eventually, many of these companies did sign to become official third parties after the settlement with Activision. But until then, they were just shitting out ports of Frogger and Qbert and Donkey Kong, and many of them were good ports.
Just making money, because what are you going to do about it, Atari?
Exactly. But yeah, so they did eventually become proper licensed publishers. But until then, it was just a shitload of unlicensed games. And when Atari tried to revive the Atari 2600 in the late 80s to compete with the NES, because, the Atari 2600 totally stands up against the NES, they licensed several of these games from companies like Coleco and Parker Brothers and Activision to publish under their own name and the Atari branding. So, from unlicensed to licensed, which is a little weird, but,
And I mean, there's obviously the question of, did the glut of unlicensed games on the Atari tank the market?
Yes. That is the answer.